Welcome to the Niche Pursuits Podcast. Are you ready to discover some niche business ideas that actually work? Well, it's time for a motivational kick to jumpstart your next big idea. Here's your host, Spencer Haas.
Hey everyone, it's Spencer here with nichepursuits.com, and welcome back to another Niche Pursuits podcast. Today's going to be a great episode because we actually have Andrew Youderian from ecommercefuel.com with us here on the show, and we're going to dive into his story, how he's been able to build out a couple of different e-commerce sites, and exactly what the process is and how that's gone for him. But Andrew really started out basically like the rest of us. He went to university, got a degree, and went and started working in the corporate world. It didn't take him very long to figure out that he didn't like his corporate job very much. And so he took the leap of faith and actually just quit his job. He was a single guy at the time and decided to eventually figured out he wanted to dive into building out e-commerce sites. And so the first one that he built was rightchannelradios.com, and then the second one a little bit later was trollingmotors.net. We're going to dive into the story behind both of those sites, including the fact that he just sold trollingmotors.net for $170,000 at the beginning of this year, and the unique way in which he did that. So throughout this entire podcast, be sure to take some notes because there's a lot of great tips on best practices for building out an e-commerce site. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, this is definitely a great episode for you. So with that, let's jump right into the interview. Hey everyone, welcome to another Niche Pursuits podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Haas from nichepursuits.com. And as always, I have Perrin with me on as co-host. Perrin, how you doing?
Pretty good. Hey everybody.
Awesome. And today is going to be a little bit different than we've done in the past, at least for a little while. We actually have a guest on the show with us. Perrin and I have been getting in the habit of just doing either a solo podcast or just him and I discussing things. But today we are very excited to have Andrew with us from ecommercefuel.com. So Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Spencer. Hey, Perrin. I appreciate you guys bringing me on. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to reach out because your business deals with an aspect of online marketing that we haven't dug into a lot. I have built a ton of niche websites and I use SEO to drive free traffic to those sites. But what you've done, rather than monetizing the sites with AdSense or affiliate revenue, such as I've done for the most part, you've gone into the e-commerce avenue where you're out actually selling the products and shipping those out to customers, and the profit margins are a little bit higher. So that's what we want to discuss. But first, we want to get your story just a little bit. Maybe you can tell us what you were doing before you started online marketing and how you made that happen to do it full time.
Absolutely. I got out of school and jumped right into the corporate world for a couple of years, and I didn't really mean to get into kind of I guess a high workload finance position, but I did, and pretty quickly realized it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to be doing for the rest of my life, and was doing long distance with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, Annie, and so it's the kind of thing where I'd be lucky to see her once every six weeks for 48 hours, and it was just it wasn't something I wanted to make my my life on a perpetual basis, and so quickly realized that, started saving some money. And as you guys know, probably as a single guy, you can live pretty cheaply, right? And so I just saved some runway and quit after a couple of years and tested a couple different business models. I was looking at photography for a while. I was really big in photography at the time, and I was looking at day trading, options and things like that, which I think I'm probably pretty fortunate I steered clear of that. Probably would have lost my shirt in that one. And eventually got into, and e-commerce was one of those models I was looking at, and ultimately I picked it because it offered a lot of flexibility, the ability to scale up a business more easily. And so I just started looking for niches, and Number one goal was just to find a niche that I could make a viable business out of, and did some research, picked radio equipment, started a business, a drop shipping business selling radio equipment, and I did that for a couple of years and was able to scale that to the point where it was providing a full-time income, and started a second business, a trolling motor site, trollingmotors.net, and I grew that for a couple of years and then sold that. And now I'm over at ecommerce Fuel, where I blog about a lot of the e-commerce stuff I do, as well as run a private community for kind of experienced professionals and store owners. So I'm sure there's maybe parts that you want to dive into a little more thoroughly, but that's a 40,000 foot shot of kind of my story.
That's pretty cool. So I didn't know you just saved up money and quit your job without really having something in place before you did it.
Oh no, I had nothing. I mean,
awesome.
People, it drove my family crazy, especially my mother. She was like, "What are you doing?" Yeah. But I don't know. I think it's interesting because people always ask, should you quit before you have a site going or after? And for me, it was great because not having a job and no income coming in made me, that first year, I don't know if I'll ever be able to replicate the drive and the productivity levels of that first year.
Yeah.
It's different for everyone, but it worked out well in my case.
Yeah. It's awesome.
I mean, it takes a brave soul to be able to do that for sure. My story was a little bit different because I had a family already. I have 4 kids now, but when I quit my job, I had 3 kids. And so I had to be sure that I had savings in place and a working business so that I could support my family before I quit. So that's really cool to be able to have that flexibility. Like you said, it's pretty cheap to live as a single guy. You can eat top ramens and whatever else you want. Live on the cheap.
Yeah, that's impressive, Spencer. Did you have niche pursuits and niche sites going on the side that helped you ramp it up, or did you kind of just make a concerted effort over a multi-year period to just save a runway?
Yeah, so it definitely was a multi-year effort. So yeah, I built my first site in like 2005, and of course didn't know what I was doing, and for a couple years really didn't know what I was doing. And it wasn't until early 2009 that I really made an effort, again on the side, to ramp up my niche site business. And so I had figured out how Google worked and how to rank, get that free traffic, and that's when I ramped up my niche site business from about 2009 to 2011. And my side income just kept growing until it actually exceeded my day job in early 2011, and that's when I quit. So I had already saved up about 6 months worth of living expenses. I was making more on the side than I was at my full-time job. So it was a pretty easy, transition for me to quit. And I started nichepursuits.com right about the same time as I quit my job.
Ah, okay. Very cool. Yeah, it's one thing that I always try to tell young people if they're like, if you're a single guy and you're thinking about doing this and you have the will and the drive to save up, a good year's amount of living expenses. It's so much easier to do as a single guy than as a, you have a family. I'm married, I have a daughter, and it's, there's a lot more stress, like you said, when you're doing it for other people. And if you're thinking about doing it, if you can do it when you're single and you're younger, it's a lot easier.
Yep, absolutely. So let's go ahead and dive into those sites, the 2 sites that you've created. I think you're going to have a lot that you can teach us here. Certainly, Perrin and I, we want to pick your brain because we're a little bit selfish and maybe we want to go the e-commerce route here in the future. But listeners as well, I think, can learn a lot from you. So you created, the first site you created was rightchannelradios.com, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's correct.
And then the second one was trollingmotors.net. So, why don't you dive into the story? Take us, and you can pick either one or both, or whatever you recommend now for the timeline, if you will, of a site. How do you do your research, and how long does it take you to create the site and get that ranking? And we're going to kind of pick your brain along the way here anyway. So
something interesting also before we get started is that our listeners might not know that you do everything mostly through SEO. Isn't that right, Andrew?
In terms of traffic generation, yes. Yeah, I'd say we don't do, for the sites that we do, they're drop shipped and the margins are going to be a little smaller. And so we don't do paid traffic hardly at all. It's mostly referral, standard marketing, and SEO.
Yeah, so yeah, and I'm just curious about that as you start to get into your timeline because it was really interesting to me. When I hear e-commerce, I think PPC. So if you can touch on that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, of course. Well, let me give you. And you were kind of asking about the timeline and the process, and I think it's, at least for me, it's been similar in terms of the life cycle for the different businesses. And so I'll kind of give a high level that's pretty applicable to both sites I started. So starting out, of course, just looking for a niche. I started out with right channel radios, really just doing a top-down analysis. My goal was to find a niche that I thought would be, I would have the best chances of actually building into a profitable business. And so I looked at a lot of different things at the time. Kind of like you said, Spencer, I really didn't know what I was doing, but was able to focus at least on a couple things that I think pointed me in the right direction. One, I was looking for, obviously your standard keyword research, looking for a niche where there's enough traffic to actually build a viable store, but not so much that you're going to be competing with eons of not eons but legions of entrenched competitors. And so obviously it's going to vary based on the niche and your profit margins and a lot of factors. But I tend to find like 5,000 to 3,000 to 10,000 exact match, or even 3,000 to 20,000 exact match, like a primary keyword, is a good range. So I looked at that. I looked at how much where I could add value for a niche in terms of how confusing is something. Because when you drop ship something, you're selling a commodity. I don't have my own product. Something in the future I would love to sell. And a lot of the really successful e-commerce entrepreneurs I see now, they make their own product.
Yeah.
And so you've got to add value somewhere, and I try to do that through demystifying really confusing purchases. So I look for how much value I can add in a niche. You look for accessories with low margins in drop shipping. Your average margins in drop shipping are, with the trolling motor site, actually that sold that and publicly disclosed all the numbers, and the margins there were just north. They're about 10%ish, just slightly north of that, which is pretty low. And you're going to see 10 to 30% be pretty average for drop shipping, whereas you're making your own product, you're going to have much higher margins. And so accessories really allow you to, it's much easier to get a premium on accessories versus on higher ticket items. So I'm kind of going on some of these criteria, but starting out, I'll usually, really just brainstorm a lot of ideas, filter them through the criteria, and then come up with a niche that you just pick, and you do your research and you go with something that you think you hope is gonna work, and it's never a sure thing, and you have your doubts, but you set that up, and then you build out a store and get it live. And I say that process, for me, usually takes anywhere from a month to 2 months when I did it both of those times.
From zero being not having an idea to having a website up and running with a store ready to take orders?
Yeah, I'd say the first time was probably about 4 to 5 weeks, and the second time was probably maybe a little more than 2 months, maybe 2 to 3 months for the second one. But yeah, in that 1 to 3 month period.
So I've got two related questions, I think. So what does that store look like, first of all? I mean, are we talking like one store with one product, or maybe are you selling 15 products, or what does it look like at that point?
Yeah, good question, and it varied for the different stores. For my for right channel radios, it was probably maybe 200 products. A lot of them had manufacturer descriptions in there. Again, this is when I was starting out and just getting something up to work. So maybe 200 products. It looked terrible. It looked like it looked awful. Like a love child of the 90s HTML. So it looked pretty hideous. The trolling motor site, actually, I kind of did something I wish I hadn't, and I paid a professional designer to come in and create a real fancy, snazzy site. Again, using a lot of manufacturer, to a lesser degree, manufacturer descriptions and specs. We did some of our own copy, but we didn't bootstrap it very well. We paid to really have a nicely designed site out of the gates. And down the road, maybe getting ahead of myself, but I kind of regretted that because in the long term, it was hard to update. We didn't really understand how the site worked. It was not an intuitive platform. It wasn't on Shopify or BigCommerce where you could change things around easily. It was on Magento where the theming can be a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so we ended up ripping down the entire site and starting from scratch because we got too sophisticated out of the gates.
Yeah, makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, so something that comes to mind, and I guess is honestly partially the reason that I've never got into drop shipping or creating an e-commerce site, is that it just seems like it would be complicated, or it's out of my realm of expertise for how to find a drop shipper. Can you walk us through that process? I mean, it sounds like, hey, I built this site in a month and I had the store up and running, but what's the process of finding a drop shipper and how difficult is that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's actually something I should have mentioned in the niche selection process too, is I'll look at, can I source this product? How many suppliers are there? How good are they? So that's definitely something that also weighs into your into that niche selection process. In terms of finding them, I think it's easier than people think. I think there's a lot of kind of confusion and I don't know, fear isn't the right word, but I think people overhype how hard it is to find a supplier.
Sure.
And it's actually not too bad. You can get on Worldwide Brands, and they have a decent number, but I would say probably they're a better tool for. Are you guys familiar with Worldwide Brands?
I am not.
I've seen
Okay.
it just from your ebook, but
Yeah, so it's probably one of the better known supplier directories for drop shippers online, and it's like I think it's like $300. You buy a membership to it,
yeah.
and they do have a lot of great suppliers, but they actually I would almost recommend them more for brainstorming niche ideas than for sourcing suppliers for a niche you already have. And so there's a couple ways you can do it. You can call up if you know what you want to sell. You can call up the manufacturer and just ask them for their listed distributors. Just say, hey, do you drop ship? And sometimes manufacturers do, but generally it's going to be harder to convince them to drop ship directly for you as opposed to a wholesaler who will buy from them and drop ship for you. So you can just ask them where you can buy their products wholesale. That's one route, and then another is just really going into Google and doing some old fashioned just digging. And one thing about drop shippers and wholesalers in general is they're not traditionally fantastic marketers. It's just a different business model. If they were, they would probably be in retail. So.
Right.
So their websites are often pretty ugly, pretty hideous. They're not going to be often on the first page, and so if you really mess around with a lot of different modifiers, supplier, wholesaler, drop shipper, things like that, and you're willing to kind of go past the first page or two, maybe where there's a lot of scammy middlemen that have marketed for those positions, you usually find suppliers that way. Not always. Sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes there are niches where it's really hard to source a product. Maybe there's an exclusive. There's only one or two suppliers have exclusive deals, or maybe the manufacturer only sells to people who have storefronts. But if you can do it, that's the way that I would recommend going about it.
Yeah, and maybe you can talk about, because when we are starting a website, we have a process for selecting a niche, and I'm curious to see if it's the same thing in e-commerce. Are you looking for specific keywords, or is it a supplier question? And I know this could be a whole separate podcast, but briefly, what are the criteria when you're looking for a market to break into?
So this is actually like a niche attribute scorecard that I use as part of a training that I have for starting a business. And going down the list here, at the very top, and these are kind of in order, I rank them in order of what I think is most important. And at the very top, I've got potential to add value. And these are from a drop shipping perspective, if you're selling existing products, but potential to add value is one. Number two is marketing opportunities. So, some niches are just much easier to market than others. If you're selling GoPros, those things are tons of marketing opportunities and virality to them. If you're selling, you're selling thumbtacks, obviously it's not going to be as exciting. Number of accessories is number three. A 50 to 200 price point is number four. And it doesn't have to be right in that range, and that's kind of that $50 to $200 range price point is more of a rough order size, not necessarily for every item, but the rough order size for people. I just having sold items that are in that range and having sold trolling motors, which are potentially in the $1,000 plus range. If you're looking for a scalable business and you don't want to be on the phones a lot, and unless you have a lot higher margins on those higher ticket price items, people are going to want to talk to somebody much more for a higher price point ticket than obviously for something lower. Product turnover, I like niches where you don't have a product that turns over every year. If you're in fashion and you're trying to have a fourth, let's even say just like a 500 SKU fashion store where you have 500 items that all of those turn over every year, oh my gosh, that's a lot of work to try to keep up on.
Yeah.
In terms of new product pages, and the pages that you just got ranking, all of a sudden they're obsolete because they're not in fashion anymore. So I like niches where there's not a ton of turnover. I look at product size. Smaller is better for shipping. Increasing market demand in terms of looking at Google Trends to see is this something that's on the rise or is it fading off? Quality of the manufacturers. Some niches have really well-known, trusted manufacturers, which can make your job a lot easier if you can source their products. Hard to find locally. The harder it is to find locally, obviously, the more likely people are going to go online to buy it. But at the same time, of course, you want to balance that with demand. You want something that's not super available locally, but also that's not so obscure that you can't build a business on it. Disposable or consumable. This is something that I've got. I really wish that I was in my niches where people had more repeat business because you take care of people and they're going to come back to you. And not to say that great customer service is wasted on a site where you don't have a lot of repeat business, but it definitely can. It definitely is a multiplier if you do.
Yeah.
Quality of customers. You think about somebody who is. For trolling motors, for example, somebody who owns a $50,000 bass boat is probably going to be a little more willing to spend $1,500 on a GPS-powered trolling motor than someone who maybe is a do-it-yourselfer or is more into, I always think of the DIY crowd because they tend to be a little more cost-sensitive.
Right.
But you want to look at your customers, how much they're willing to spend. Embarrassing niche, if you can find a niche that people aren't willing to talk about. My wife Annie, like when we had our first daughter, she was like, Andrew, I have the perfect niche for you. And I was like, oh, what is it? Tell me. She's like, you can add value. It's great. Nobody's going to want to get into it. I was drooling and salivating. And she says, you got to get into the breast pump market. It's so confusing and nobody's doing it well. And I was like, I'm a sucker for great niches, but even I do not want to get into that market.
You couldn't go to that level.
I found the level where I will stoop, I guess, or where my dignity is, but I just didn't want to be the breast pump guy. So
That's right. You gotta be a true man.
Right. But, so embarrassing niches, thinking like toe fungus kind of stuff. It's people are not sexy. People don't want to get in there. And then also older forgotten niches. I think there's something to be said for potentially looking at older industries that, again, maybe not embarrassing, but not as sexy, where a lot of the entrenched competitors are maybe older legacy guys that aren't up to speed on things. And so you're never going to find a niche that meets all of those, but the more you can find of those, in my opinion, the better for selling existing products.
Cool.
Yeah, those are some great points, really good points that certainly can be good not only if you're creating an e-commerce site, but even just a normal old niche site, if you will. Those are some great takeaways that people can have there. What about specifically for looking at Google competition, which I guess is kind of what Perrin mentioned about specific keywords? Are you looking at how difficult it might be to rank for certain keywords within Google as well, or do you just pick a niche that has a lot of that criteria that you just mentioned, and then after the fact start looking at specific keywords?
And now definitely look at the keywords and the competition and the competitive landscape. And it's a bit of a science. It can be hard to nail down an exact formula. But some of the things I look at is from an SEO standpoint, I type in that primary head keyword. And let's say you're using trolling motors, for example, and a lot of this may not apply perfectly to trolling motors because I've learned a ton since trolling motors. But so if you go back and reverse engineer this, and you're like, hey, this isn't exactly what you said. That's why. But looking at niches now, you type in a primary head term, and I like looking at, are there any niche sites ranking for this term? If results 1 through 10 are Amazon, eBay, Wikipedia, buy.com, and a bunch of other very authoritative names. Can you break in? Yes. Is it going to take a decent chunk of time and work and effort? Yes. And even though you can probably most of your traffic isn't going to come from those head terms anyway. I think, I tend to see 70 to 90% of my traffic come from long tail variations. It's a great litmus test in my mind to see, okay, how competitive is this niche? If I can see at least 2 or 3 stores that specialize in that niche that are in among the big boys on those 1 through 10 rankings, that to me is a good sign. Because that means at least there's some room for some independent folks, and you're probably with some work going to be able to optimize for some of those longer tail keywords. The other thing I like to look for on an SEO front is not just how much head keyword volume there is, but how much volume there is for the long tail variations, how many long tail variations there are, and how quickly the volume drops off for those long tail variations. If you have, you type in a niche and you see 20 long tail variations with volume, it's in the 4, 5, even 3 or 2,000 exact match searches for all of those. To me, that's a great sign, because where you're going to be able to outrank some of those bigger boys, if you have a shot at it, is in the long tail and optimizing for that niche. If you see a head term, and then maybe 3 or 4 long tail variations, and then on variation number 5, you're already in the triple digits, and then you're dropping quickly. To me, that's a really bad sign, and it's going to be harder to rank for.
Yeah, no, those are great points, and it's funny that you mentioned that. I mean, that's the exact criteria that Perrin and I look at. The first one that you mentioned, we love to see other niche websites already ranking on the first page of Google. It's just a sign that either newer sites or less authoritative type sites are able to rank in Google. And so we say, well, why not us? Why can't we do the same? Build a site, start ranking. So yeah, exact same criteria that we look at as far as that's concerned. Now, in addition, you mentioned, so you get your store. So let's look at, rightchannelradios.com. You've got that up after a couple of months. You have the store up and running. And are you waiting, or what are you doing to actively try and get your site up and ranking in Google? Do you have a content strategy as far as a blog, or what sort of off-page optimization are you doing as well?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, because it's always just been mystifying for me, for like stores, because are you using manufacturer descriptions? Do those rank? Are you writing your own descriptions? Are you doing reviews of the products? Are you maybe doing tutorials or whatever? And I also know that from reading your ebook that you do lots of white hat linking stuff and trying to go out and get those really nice natural links. So I'm really curious too.
Yeah, and this is probably a good point to talk about kind of the phase 2 of the store, because this will tie in well once you've got a site live, a ghetto site live, and a niche picked. How do you go from there? I will preface this by saying I think it's getting harder to a lot of the techniques I've traditionally used to rank sites. Probably I think they still work, but they're probably not quite as effective today as maybe they were 2 or 3 or 4 years ago when I was getting these going. I think the landscape's changed in that regard. But first off, I will start using paid traffic, even if, like I've mentioned, your drop shipping margins are a little bit lower. It's harder to make money profitably and see a positive ROI from paid traffic. The one thing paid traffic allows you to do is really interact with people immediately, drive immediate traffic, and get to know your customer base, because that's, at least in the niches I've been in, I know before I started my CB radio website, I'd never touched a CB radio. Ditto with trolling motors, and so learning who your customers are, what they want, what products are popular, what problems they have, getting that crash course in your niche is priority number 1, in my opinion. So I'll run traffic to understand the niche as best as possible. In terms of marketing it and starting to build that organic traffic, because obviously it takes time. That's not something that's going to happen overnight. Traditionally, I've always taken an approach of really trying to add value to other sites. And the ways most specifically that's worked out for me has been product reviews, like donating products, physical products to bloggers, to website owners, to people who have forums, to either for giveaways or for them to review and just do a write-up of. That's worked really well for me. Guest posting has worked really well for me, but not spammy shotgun, hey, dear webmaster, I would like to write an article for your site. But very, very targeted approaches where you find someone who actually could genuinely benefit from an article, do your research, understand them, and write a very personalized message that has a value proposition for their visitors and focuses on them. Those have been probably the two best techniques I've used. With my trolling motor site, I did hire an SEO firm that went out, and second time through, I was like, hey, this SEO stuff is a ton of work, right? I'm going to hire someone else to do all this.
Right.
And for a while, it worked pretty well. We ranked really well. I mean, we were like top 2 in Google for trolling motors, and wrote a whole post on this, but just got destroyed by Penguin. Penguin came along and knocked off 80% of our traffic. And it didn't happen to Right Channel, where I had definitely, was more of a white hat strategy. And so you can do that, and it works for potentially for a couple, a year or two if you're lucky, but you're almost always going to, pay the bill at some point.
Yeah, those are some good points. With a physical product, doing some giveaways and other things where you can actually ship a product and have people do a review, that's a nice strategy that you can't do with a typical affiliate site. So that's a good point as well. Perrin, I don't know if you have any other questions specifically for SEO. I mean, it sounds like for the most part, it's going to be the same for any site, whether you have an e-commerce site or just a totally content-based website. Link building and off-page optimization, the things that you need to do for SEO to rank in Google is going to be about the same.
Yeah, and that was, in terms of the SEO approach, we definitely did, tried to do best practices for internal site linking, making sure that we had some decent on-page optimization, that we knew what keywords people were searching for, and so, optimize on titles and headings and things like that. But for our off-page efforts, those were really, I think we did some other things too, but those were the things where we saw the biggest bang for the buck.
Sure, yeah. And I guess I do have a couple follow-up questions. Are you linking mostly to just your home page, or are you linking to specific product pages? And if you know a product sells particularly well, do you try to get that ranking better, or are you investing more in the SEO for that particular product, or kind of what's your overall strategy as far as where you're pointing the SEO juice?
Yeah, great question. Traditionally, I started off always trying to link to the homepage, because the thought is, hey, your homepage, your money keyword, right? Trolling motors, let's get that ranking as quickly as possible. But one, it doesn't convert as well as your long-term keywords. And secondly, it's way harder to rank. And so, linking internally, I found to be the best bet, because you're going to have a better time ranking those. And naturally, as you get more internal links, your domain authority overall is going to increase, which is, in effect, over time, going to push up your homepage ability to rank in the SERPs. And then in terms of focusing on the products that are the most popular, we definitely do that. I probably haven't done that to the extent we should have in terms of having that be a good core strategy. But yeah, definitely, if we've done it implicitly, and it's a great. Obviously, the more popular your products, the faster you can rank those, the better returns you're going to see.
Yep, absolutely. So you've got your site up and running, you've got your store, you're starting to rank in Google, getting some traffic. Can you give us an idea of how long it took you to start making a decent amount of sales? Certainly, you would have a couple of sales trickle in here and there, but how long did it take you to start having consistent sales for either one of your sites, just to give people a time frame? Is it 3 months, 6 months, a year? How long did it take you to do that?
Yeah, in terms of getting consistent sales, I think it took me a couple weeks to get my first sale after I launched. And then probably that second month, I was able to get a couple sales per day. Maybe third or fourth month, I was up to 3 sales a day, 3 to 4. And then it probably took about, in terms of replacing my income from when I quit, it probably took about a year on a run rate. In terms of your monthly income, it took me probably about 12 months to get back to that level. But that was, for me, that was full-time, looking behind me, terrified I'm going to have to go back to a day job kind of work.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it varies based on, obviously, it varies based on a ton of different variables. But for me, it took about a year.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that a similar timeline that you think somebody's starting today? Is that a feasible timeline for somebody within about a year? They can start making some pretty decent sales?
A good question. I think it depends which way you're going. I think drop shipping is getting more competitive. It's just online. The online space is getting more crowded with people who are reselling, and it's getting harder to drop ship, frankly. So I would say if you're drop shipping, you've got more competition, you have to stand out more, and your niche selection is so crucial with drop shipping, because if you get it wrong and you can't add value, it's very difficult to differentiate yourself because you're competing with people selling the exact same thing. I think if you have a little bit of capital where you can start your own business, you can develop your own product and brand something, even if it's just white labeling. I think it's very feasible within a year. Let's say you've got $5,000 or $10,000 to invest, and you're willing to put it in a year of work. I think it's very feasible to be able to build a brand and a business that can support you full time on that if you're solving a legitimate problem or if you've got a great product.
Yeah, that is what I was going to follow up with, is, whether it's just better if you're going to put in all that effort, and due to the competitive landscape, whether to just create your own product from scratch, or, like you said, maybe white label. That way you can have the brand and build that up, and your profit margin is going to be a little bit higher, I would assume.
Yeah, dropshipping is so attractive because there's so little outlay at the beginning, right? But your long-term ROI is so much better if you have your own product, and this is coming from a guy who's been dropshipping for 6 years.
Right.
So, that's for people who are willing to take on a little more risk and a little more capital investment. That's where it's at.
So I have maybe a question that's going to bring us back to kind of the beginning, but it's on my list and I think it's important. So the question is, should SEOs do e-commerce? Because right now we're building sites with, like Amazon, and we are reviewing products and we're getting between 6 and 8% commissions. And drop shipping, we might be getting 10%, but there's also a lot of moving parts involved. So if you were going to sell us on it or sell our audience on it, what do you think are the biggest benefits of doing an e-commerce store as opposed to, say, an affiliate site?
I think with e-commerce, if you do it right, and I've never done it this way, but it's one of the attractive aspects of having your own product. If you create a product in the right way, you can scale it up with paid traffic in a way you can't with SEO. SEO by default takes a while to kick in, and it takes a lot of work. And if you've got a product that has a 40% margin, and you're effectively able to buy clicks, buy customers for let's say you make $40 a sale, and you can buy customers for $25 consistently with paid traffic, you can scale that up very quickly.
Yeah.
In a way you can't with dropshipping, in a way you can't with affiliate marketing, or at least affiliate marketing in the sense if you're doing a 6% Amazon commission share, because it's gonna be tough to run a profitable ad campaign with a 6% payout margin. So for me, that's the biggest, that's one of the biggest attractive advantages to the model that I see. I mean, with affiliate marketing and commissions, obviously it's completely 100% passive. And if you're doing e-commerce, you do have to set, regardless of whether you're drop shipping or selling your own item, you still are probably going to have to do customer service. You're going to have to, be a little more involved in the process and the logistics to varying degrees. But yeah, that's the biggest advantage I see.
Yeah. So, to follow up with that point, and this goes back to why I got involved in affiliate marketing in the first place, is because of that more passive aspect, the more hands-off approach. While I'm sleeping, people are clicking on my ads and they're going to Amazon, and Amazon's fulfilling everything. I don't have to worry about customer support and returns and customer questions. That was a big draw, and is a big draw for a lot of people out there. They want to build these sites, they want to produce great content and work on their own time when they can, but they don't want to deal with customers. And I'll be honest, that's a big reason why I haven't looked into doing perhaps an e-commerce store, creating a physical product. How much time is spent on customer service, and how big of an issue is support?
Yeah, it really depends on your niche, and depends on your team. I think for my business right now, I've got a team that takes care of it. We primarily focus on email and don't do a ton of phone support. So if you get a good team in place, and you get someone who can manage that you trust, and you can train them well and set up some good systems, it doesn't have to be too bad. If you're willing to invest in that on the upfront side. So, but again, it totally varies based on the niche as well. But yeah, I'd say like for Right Channel, we've got a team member in the Philippines who works full time with us. She helps with a lot of other things, but she also does a lot of I'd say probably most of our tier 1 support, and she's really good. I mean, she's been with us for a year and a half, and she really knows the radio market well and provides good support. And then we have a sales manager who kind of handles some of the stickier situations, the phone calls, things like that. But I'd say it's going to vary, but it's not something that I don't think it's something where I think it's possible to build a lifestyle business, to build an e-commerce business that can be passive for long periods of time. It's not going to be as passive as affiliate marketing. I mean, I tend to go through cycles where my team and I will spend 2 to 3 months or 4 months really fleshing out a new site design and doing a lot of maintenance and upgrades and improvements, and then we'll let it coast for 12 months, 18 months. Then we'll come back again 18 months later and bam, really focus on that. So you don't have the passive aspect on that, but the support doesn't have to keep you up for indefinitely.
Do you use PPC, or have you used PPC to scale your sites, like you were saying?
We've experimented with it a little bit, but not a ton. No, we haven't. Again, just because the margins on the trolling motor side, the margins were difficult to make work.
Yeah.
And it's something we probably could spend a little more time with, but it's based relative to some of the other areas that we look at. Invest time, because even PPC. The smaller your margins are, the smaller that spread is between your costs and your margins. The more closely you have to monitor your campaigns, the more time you have to spend in optimizing those. And so for our radio business, could we probably get at some paid campaigns that would be profitable? Yeah, we probably could. It would probably take a decent chunk of ongoing time to make sure those were optimized. And relative to the payoff on doing marketing, SEO organically, or conversion optimization, I think that it would probably be better spent in those areas.
Very interesting. And then when you have done it, where did you get it? Just AdWords?
We have done, mostly AdWords. Yeah, we've done a little bit of form advertising. We've done a little bit of product listing ads with Trolling Motors, which was about a break even. We had someone who came in and ran that for us, and it was close to a slightly profitable with them doing it. But I'm not sure if it was profitable enough to keep going on an ongoing basis in terms of managing him as well. And so those are the mediums we've used.
Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to dig into a couple of numbers. Can you give us an idea of how much traffic your radio site gets, and if you're willing to share the accompanying revenue numbers? So maybe how much traffic is it getting either a daily or monthly basis, and what sort of revenue is it still bringing in today?
Yeah, I don't usually talk about numbers for the CB business, but I'd be happy to share any numbers or metrics for the trolling motor business.
Sure, yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So that one, again, that wasn't something, and I sold that back in, I think, January, and so all this was public, but I think in 2013, it did right around $600K in revenue on roughly just north of 10% margins, gross margins, so I think like maybe 11, 12%, something like that.
That's awesome.
And in terms of the traffic, man, I'm trying to think. Okay, for the traffic for the year, it looks like it got, and this is between late 2012 and late 2013, it looked like it was about 185,000 visitors to that site.
Okay, so on a monthly basis, I'm just divided by 12. It's around 15,400 or so visitors, which, yeah, I mean, it's a decent amount of traffic, but it's not a huge number. It looks like close to maybe between 500 and 600 visitors a day, which is a decent sized site. But because it's an e-commerce site, I mean, the revenue is huge for something only doing that amount of traffic, which is kind of interesting to see to me that, yeah, I mean, the value per visitor is quite high.
Well, you got to remember, though, too, the revenue per visitor is high.
The revenue per visitor,
yeah,
sure.
But when you look at the profit margin gets chopped based on those margins, that 10, 11% margins. So
yeah, no, I mean, that's still decent, obviously. And I know you've also shared this publicly, that you went through an interesting process of selling trollingmotors.net. and of course did eventually sell it. Why don't you just give our listeners just a quick rundown of how you sold it and how that went for you?
Sure. So I decided I wanted to sell the business for a bunch of different reasons. Partly because I wanted to focus on my other businesses. Partly because I just thought it'd be an interesting experience, and frankly as well, it wasn't the sole reason, but it definitely was kind of a nice cherry on top. Was I thought it'd be a really interesting case study and would help me with branding and exposure for e-commerce fuel as well.
Yeah.
And so instead of going the traditional broker route, what I did was I really just posted all of the financials on my blog. I was actually reading those numbers that you gave me just from the blog post that I wrote over e-commerce fuel, and so it was an open auction in terms of, or an open sale in terms of the open financials and stats. That was one. I did a reverse auction, what's called a Dutch auction. So instead of saying the price is X, or instead of saying I'm going to sell it to the highest bidder in 30 days, I started the price high and every week dropped it by X amount. And then the first person to make a bid actually won the site, and they were the winner. And so you could wait. The longer you wait, the lower the price got, but also the more you risked losing the sale to somebody else.
Right.
I also offered an incentive to really help propel, not propel, but spread the word about the sale. So I offered a 5% commission to somebody if they referred me. And so it could have been something as easy as, hey, if I end up buying the site and I heard about you just from my friend who tweeted about it, well, hey, that's a legitimate form of recommendation. And so you could potentially, make a bunch of money by a tweet. And so hopefully I think that helped with the sale approach. And then I just tried to write about the entire process as much as I could through the process all the way through close. And so it was definitely a different different method to a sale when sales are usually pretty closely guarded and much more private. And did end up getting a bid, work through the process. Had a few little glitches in it, but had a fantastic buyer and ended up closing the sale in January of this year.
Awesome. And what was the final selling price again?
Final selling price was $170,000.
Awesome. No, that's very cool to have an exit like that, and of course to do it publicly. I'm sure it did draw a lot of attention to e-commerce fuel, and I wanted to go ahead and move into that section, I guess, of our podcast here and talk about e-commerce fuel just a little bit. Maybe you can tell people what you're doing there and what the plans are for the community that you're starting.
Yeah, absolutely. So e-commerce fuel really do a couple of things over there, and primarily we have a podcast, the e-commerce fuel podcast, where we talk about building e-commerce businesses and growing e-commerce businesses. On the blog, I try to share as much as many real-world case studies and information about growing a profitable business. And then I guess really have two kind of side business aspects to it. The first one is a training aspect, kind of a training course called the Insider's Guide that walks through really how to ramp up an entire business using my two businesses as case studies, TroyMotors.net and Right Channel Radios. And that niche attribute, the niche attributes we went through earlier, I actually pulled up, the niche grading worksheet which is part of the course for that, and it's all of those are on there with different weighted criteria, so you can go through, and it's a real systematic approach to go through and rank a niche, and it walks through the entire process. So that's one aspect of the business, and then the other, which I've really been focused on heavily recently, is the private forum that I have for experienced e-commerce entrepreneurs and professionals, and so. It's a community where there's some guidelines on who's eligible to be a part of it, either store owners with about $5,000 or more in monthly revenue, or professionals who have a year of experience. And it's just a community I've really been working on and fostering for people who have legitimate experience in the space to be able to connect and learn and share with each other. And so still always want to be running an e-commerce business to make sure I'm have real world experience as well to share. But
Right.
It's been a ton of fun building the community and getting to know people and networking with store owners. And it's, in terms of building e-commerce fuel, it's just, it's been a lot of fun over the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have been checking out your blog and some of the resources that you have there. I've found to be quite useful and interesting. So people can check that out at ecommercefuel.com. Perrin, did you have any other follow-up questions that you were itching to ask?
I don't think so. Maybe just giving you, Andrew, a chance to plug anything you want to plug.
I think I just plugged it.
All right.
So yeah, it's feel free to check me out at ecommercefuel.com, and hopefully you'll find some stuff there that's interesting. And there's like you mentioned, Perrin alluded to, I've got an ebook as well, a free ebook that really walks through kind of a lot of the stuff, especially on the niche selection and supplier side, that people might find interesting. And so if that's specifically something you're looking for, ecommercefuel.com/ebook. And if the form is something that would be something that you'd like to explore or look into more, that's ecommercefuel.com/form, FORUM.
Awesome. So people listening in, you can check out what Andrew's up to and his latest posts there on ecommercefuel.com and those resources. Andrew, just want to thank you a ton for coming on. It's been a lot of fun to hear your perspective on e-commerce sites, drop shipping, and everything else.
Yeah, it's been great. We reached out to you mostly because we were your fans, so it's been exciting for us.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. It's awesome coming on and talking shop, and I appreciate you guys having me on, and love what you're doing at Niche Pursuits as well, both with the project you just launched on the gaming chat side, and then also with Longtail Pro. That's such a cool story about how you built that up and developed that SaaS app. It's really interesting what you guys are up to as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We appreciate that. So once again, just thanks for being on. Best of luck in your business, and to everybody listening as well, best of luck to you as well.